Welcome to Well Delivered by FlowSpace, the podcast unpacking real insight for building and scaling modern supply chains. Today, we're joined by an e-commerce leader who's worked across enterprise retail and fast-growing DTC. We chat about customer-first fulfillment, what changes as brands scale, and what strong leadership looks like in operations.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ben Hs, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of FlowSpace, a fulfillment platform that helps fast-growing brands scale their operations. Joining me on the Well Delivered podcast, we have Chad Brinton, who's the former head of operations at True Classic, Made In, and prior to that, worked at Walmart e-commerce and also Deloitte Consulting. He is now the founder of Roger AI, a tool that helps brands find lost revenue and detect operational issues. So welcome, Chad. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ben. Appreciate it. Good to see you again. Happy to have this conversation today.
You too. So Chad, I ask everyone who comes on the podcast, you started your career in consulting. How did you get into the dark world of operations and fulfillment?
You may think that I'm joking when I say this, but I kind of think that I had a grand plan the whole time. One day I woke up from my kind of time at Deloitte in operations consulting. And I said to myself, I'd really like to get into, customer sort of online e-commerce, logistics, final mile supply chain. And like a week later, I had a inbound LinkedIn message from a Walmart recruiter. And my plan in taking that job was I was going to build the resume and cut my teeth and hope to take over operations at a direct to consumer startup one day. And, wouldn't you know it that a friend from grad school reached out to me, a few months later and asked me if I wanted to take the role at Made In. So I jumped at the opportunity. So I sort of had an idea of where I wanted to take things, and the world just kind of showed me the opportunities and I took it.
So you go from working at one of the biggest e-commerce companies around to joining a startup super early on. Maybe tell us a little about what was Made In like when you joined. How many people were there? What kind of processes were you starting with? All of that.
Yeah. So I went from an organization that at the time was 2.3 million people globally in Walmart, and joined as the 5th employee at Made In. And, honestly, surprisingly enough, from kind of the core of it, the sort of, problems that we were solving from a logistics perspective, it was really similar. It was how can we fulfill this customer's order in a single box in a single shipment, is effectively both from a cost and speed perspective and make the customer happy. And I think, Walmart is famously a very customer-centric organization, and Sam Walton, maybe not the pioneer, but at least a pioneer of kind of this customer-centric thinking and decision-making. I think that was a really great stepping stone to come into a direct-to-consumer brand. The thing that was really different, though, is for anybody who's listening to this, they're probably a startup operator too, so they probably get this, but it's really hard to describe that level of accountability when there's only 5 people sitting around the table and each of them is wearing probably 10 different hats. And, if you're not the one who gets that thing done, it's not going to get done, right? That was the thing that, was the wake-up call and the lesson hard learned in going from a big organization to a startup.
Well said. I think one of my favorite expressions is there's no one coming, right?
The help is not coming.
Help is not coming.
Yeah.
So one of the things that you mentioned, and this has struck me with working with Made In for a few years now, is how incredibly customer focused they are. And one of the questions I had for you is, how do you start to quantify that? Because that's another thing I've noticed from working with you, Chad, is incredibly data driven and trying to put numbers on some of these things. So what are you looking at to ensure that you're actually meeting the customer expectation?
Yeah, I mean, I think, from a metrics perspective, we tracked all of the things that I think you would expect from a direct-to-consumer brand, right? Like on-time fulfillment percentages, click-to-ship days and time in transit and things of that nature. And then from a customer behavior perspective, we kind of wanted to track what the customer was telling us, which was, time to second purchase or lifetime value, things of that nature, to kind of say, hey, are we doing right by the customer such that they want to come back and place another order with us. But I think the framing really matters, right? And that's where I always kind of tried to flip the conversation, where it's if somebody comes to you and tells you we've got a 99% on-time fulfillment percentage, that sounds really good, right? But when you're fulfilling 10,000 orders a day, that 1% of late orders is actually a lot of individual customers who
Yep.
have a single experience with your brand where they didn't have a good experience. And, it could have been a couple weeks before their order shipped because something was out of stock or something happened, right? And so to me, I think like it's not just the data, but it's how you frame it and how you talk about it to really kind of put yourself in the customer's shoes and kind of play that role to really understand like what is, a 99% on time rate even mean, right?
Right. I think that's so well said is that often you can kind of fall into the trap of looking at these dashboards and, 99% sounds great, but that could be
Yeah.
100 people. So I think one of the goals, I guess, of any e-commerce brand, but is to have this like higher level of service or the hospitality level of service. I guess
Yeah.
what does that mean to you, Chad? And like kind of translating that into an operational focus.
Yeah. Yeah, hospitality level focus was something that one of the co-founders at Made In kind of coined. His family was in the commercial cookware business he was the third generation of it. And, they spent their entire career and in some cases lives, sort of adjacent to this hospitality industry. And, it was required reading at one point for Made In, the book by Danny Meyer, Setting the Table, where he kind of famously talks about things like unreasonable hospitality and things of that nature. And I think it's really just like a no one size fits all approach, right? Like every customer who's coming to you has a unique need and maybe a unique problem, and how you go about solving that isn't necessarily like codified in an SOP that you train every customer service agent or everyone who interacts with a customer on. It's really taking the time to understand, what's their scenario and what happened here. I can remember instances, while of course this isn't the most scalable model, but there were times we would we ran a promotion and maybe we were selling like, pizza flour, dough flour to go along with something. And we ran out of stock and, we didn't make that thing. So we didn't have more of it once we were out of stock. But
Right.
like, we'd go on Amazon and we'd buy it for the customer and we'd ship it to their house, just, to try to make right and, try to make whole on our promise. And I think it's getting creative and doing things like that to solve a problem. And we always used to talk about finding a way to say yes rather than, saying like, well, our policy is X or, we can do Y. It's like, what would yes look like in this scenario?
That's such a great point, and we try to do that on our
Yeah,
side as well because I think it's often easy to lose in the shuffle that every one of those boxes, every one of those orders, that could be the first time that someone's ever experienced your product, right? You might be
totally.
doing, and it's easy to lose sight of that when it's a line on a spreadsheet or something like that. So it's fun, and I think ultimately any fulfillment operator, their goal is to make the merchant look good in
Yeah.
front of their consumers. Shifting gears a little bit. So you obviously had a tremendous run at Made In, helping to scale that brand into what it is today from 5 people all the way here, and then left and joined a really fast growing fashion brand for men, True Classic. And many listeners probably have the t-shirts that they're famous for. It's very different products, obviously, but were there similar problems or were they totally different? Just curious what that experience was like.
Yeah, I mean, and wearing one of the shirts right now, a heavy percentage of my wardrobe is still True Classic for sure. Again, kind of like the transition from Walmart to Made In, where a lot of the core problems were just the reality of doing business online and making customers happy and making sure you were making the right decisions to kind of do right by the customer and do right by the P&L. It was really similar, but I think every startup operator is very aware, at least for call it the last 6 to 7 years, that there have been some very unique exogenous variables that have presented unique problems at different points in the journey. And, my time at True Classic was very much categorized by sort of the volatility of tariffs that, were a reality of that time. And it was a bit of a different product where the manufacturing base for apparel is much more fungible than it is this craftsman, cookware,
Sure.
family owned, generational business sort of sourcing model that Made In has versus clothing. So I was pretty thankful that, we had an opportunity to be really competitive in our sourcing and, how we thought about globally sourcing products when the reality of tariffs came crashing down on everyone. So that was a bit of a silver lining, frankly, but, a difficult time, I think, for everybody who was manufacturing products and importing them.
And I guess just the ability to move so quickly really becomes
Yeah.
a core competency.
I mean, that's what True Classic really excels at, man. That business moves super, super fast. It is not for the faint of heart, and it is definitely one where you move at hyperspeed to capitalize on every opportunity and knock down any barrier in front of you.
It's awesome. Well, I have another question. Given that you've spent time at a pretty diverse group of companies, so that's Deloitte or Walmart, True Classic, Made In. How much do you believe in an operational playbook versus kind
Uh,
of as the operations leader getting there and figuring out what makes each business unique? How much is plug and play versus hey, you really need to spend some time learning how each system is different?
I'm a big believer in a playbook, actually, but I think my definition of the playbook might be a little bit different. The one thing that stands out as probably the loudest lesson learned that I had from my time at Made In was just spending the time with the finance team and thinking like an owner about the P&L and the mechanics of the P&L and what was going to move the needle. We went from a period of time where the focus was revenue growth to then, all right, EBITDA profitability, and then okay, great, now we've achieved that milestone, now it's cash flow, right? And just those distinct phases of the business really taught me, one, what it means to optimize for that part of your business at that point in your cycle. And then two, what are the levers that are at your fingertips that you can utilize to optimize any one of those? And I would say to me, that's the playbook, right? It's
Yep,
understanding that, it's understanding the strategy, like where is the business in their growth cycle along that kind of like trend. And then from there, it is playing in the margins and it's sort of customizing it for what it looks like for cookware versus t-shirts versus, big TVs at Black Friday for Walmart, right? I guess that's how I think about it.
that's awesome. I think one of the things that has struck me is just kind of the evolution of the operations role. When I was in
Mhm,
a similar role, very little interaction with sales and merchandising or the finance team, right?
mhm.
Kind of understood what my little area was. But I
Yeah.
think what you're describing is kind of this the new operations leader really needs to understand working capital. They need to understand merchandising, what the overall goal of the business is, customer service and customer satisfaction. Um,
Yeah.
you maybe just shed some light on that because it seems like a big part of your job is just understanding what else is going on in the organization other than purely operational things.
Yeah. Hearing you talk about that, it reminds me a book that I love and one that I reread recently was Delivering Happiness, the story of the Zappos founding and just kind of their evolution as a company. And the thing that I maybe didn't realize in reading that book, and that story was not that long ago, right?
Yeah,
But they were sort of one of the pioneers of this kind of e-commerce shift. And you hear about some of the challenges they ran into and, they're having problems with their fulfillment and their alternative was like, I don't know, how many fulfillment providers were there for e-commerce brands at that time? Like
right.
3, 5? I don't know, right? And now there are a lot. It's a really competitive space. I mean, you know that better than anybody. And so anyway, like I think about this example, there's so much of an ecosystem around what e-commerce operators are trying to do nowadays. And there's so much help. There's software help. There are all these channel partners. There are fulfillment partners, whatever, right? And so, I think that to me has really changed the role of the operator in a lot of ways where you don't have to go solve all these problems for yourself. You just have to have the playbook for identifying great partners, bringing them on board, looking at the right data, asking the right questions, empowering the team. And so, I think probably something I wasn't always good at and, sort of learned the hard way as every, I think, operator does, just how to be a leader and how to sort of, execute and delegate and do all those sorts of things. And that's how I, sort of categorize that role as the a successful operator, again, to maybe some varying level of degree of success.
It's such a good point about understanding the ecosystem and where you can get leverage, not
Yeah.
negotiating leverage, but just what we're seeing is many of our customers have such small teams, but really high revenue expectations, right?
Yeah.
And like understanding what software is out there, understanding what vendors can help you, maybe putting more of the onus on a vendor to help you with planning and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, operating leverage. We talk about that all the time.
Exactly. And, I think a prime example, 10 years ago when I was at the Honest Company, we had a
Yeah.
100-person engineering team, right?
Yeah.
And today, in the era of Shopify, like that would never happen today, right?
Right.
Maybe there's a few engineers, small operational team, but you're totally right. Back when you and I started, it was you had to build a lot of this stuff from scratch,
Yeah.
which was super expensive. Um,
Yeah.
so I want to segue a little bit into, we talked about systems and the metrics and stuff that you're looking at, but can you maybe talk about building teams and,
Yeah.
especially at a smaller stage company, or I should say earlier stage company, what are
Mhm.
you looking for when you recruit someone? Are you looking for that specialist who really knows one area of the supply chain, or are you looking more for, a generalist, someone who can quickly learn and be thrown into the fire and figure it out?
I would say yes, and
Yeah.
I think the reality of what you were just describing and getting sort of operating leverage and I think again something that learn the hard way through a couple cycles that this is the reality is you're only going to get a couple of really big swings at some high powered intellectual horsepower people who are going to be your right hand people at getting things done. And Kara, who you just had on your podcast, is a great example of somebody who I had worked with previously and was really excited that I was able to, bring onto the team at Made In. And I mean, she's done great things and that's who she is as a person. But, she was one of my big bets at, the generalist who I knew was super sharp and was going to work hard and was going to get it done. Um, and again, I only got to make a couple of those types of hires. And then, from there, um, it was finding those executional players who were going to also work hard and going to own an area of the business that you knew they were just going to cover it and you wouldn't have to worry about it. You wouldn't have to, wake up in the middle of the night, panic like, oh shoot, did that thing happen?
Yep.
And I think it requires both and it requires, both skill sets. And what I hope most is those folks that were brought on to those more executional roles got to go on to be the Kara at their next one because they had seen it and done it and learned a few things. And I think that is what this kind of ecosystem of operators in e-commerce industry has done a great job of, is spinning out people like yourself who, you were back at Grainger back in the day and then Honest Company and then go on to
McMaster-Carr, yeah, but it's a
yeah,
lot
yeah,
of I still keep in touch with a lot of people. Like, we have people from McMaster and other
yeah,
startups. So it's just to your point about the ecosystem and people who are curious and want to learn. And I think one of the things that I've seen some of the best operators have is just a certain humility that you might not know everything, and hiring people that are smarter than you at a certain stage, it
yeah.
can be so tremendous. And I just think back on our example. It's like, when I thought I knew a lot about warehousing and fulfillment when I
Mhm.
started the company, and then it was only after we hired certain people on the team that I was like, oh my gosh, I have so much to learn from the
Yeah,
folks that are on the team. So I think it's one of the most
yeah,
gratifying part of the job.
yeah, totally.
And one of the things, Chad, that struck me, I think, when we were having a conversation before, is you said you would never ask someone to do something that you wouldn't do yourself. What do you mean by that exactly? I know it's a cliche, but practically in your role, what does it mean?
Man, you've done some New York Times level of investigative journalism here,
You
man.
know,
I'm
I
impressed.
this podcast is serious stuff, Chad.
I can tell. I can tell. Yeah, I mean, I think that's just like who I've prided myself on being as a leader. I don't know that there's one size fits all on a leadership mentality. I've seen leaders embody a few different archetypes, and the one that I think fits me best is one of, kind of to use a word you just used of humility. I, have seen a few things, but that doesn't mean I'm smarter or, any better equipped than anyone else to solve a certain problem. So I saw my role as a leader in being, multifaceted as any role is. But one of those was, building a team of folks who were really excited about what they got to do every day and, liked the people that they were working with. And I think ultimately, if you foster that kind of environment, you get much better results out of people. That's just how I took it, and how, one of the ways I sought to embody that from a third party perspective, kind of say that's one of the things I've really appreciated about FlowSpace over the years is, you guys have great people. Like, I will never forget folks like Han and Norms, who were some of my first touch points at FlowSpace before we ever, signed an agreement to work with you guys. And I could just tell from working with those folks that you guys had a great culture and, you probably had a pretty good leadership mentality to just, foster an environment where those folks flourish and made companies more successful and folks like me happy, right?
Well, I appreciate that. And that's one of the things we are really proud of at the company. Um, with, I think this is a good segue, actually, Chad. So you've worked at some of the most successful brands in e-commerce and direct to consumer. You recently decided to take the plunge into entrepreneurship and launch your own product, and not a physical product, but a software product. So can you tell us a little about Roger AI? Why were you so compelled to do this? And what problem are you trying to solve?
Like in my role at Made In, I own all of the functions, customer support, fulfillment, IT, that when something went wrong and a customer didn't get their order and they reached out to us 10 days later and said, hey guys, place this order. Where is it? Like all of those roads led back to me. Like there was
Yeah.
no human who was like more individually responsible for that
Right.
mishap than myself. Right. So I really spent a lot of time thinking about this and kind of thinking about it from the various perspectives of the organization and how we respond to it. And, I observed things about just, time and bandwidth consumption of the customer service team trying to figure out what happened and asking the fulfillment team what went on with this order and the fulfillment team spending time getting information back to them. And then I went to True Classic and I saw the same thing going on, right? And so I think eventually, just like any good innovator, I said there's got to be a better way, and I want to go take a shot at building it. And so really, at the end of the day, the product is a built for Shopify application. It plugs in to help you understand where you might be losing revenue from the sales that you captured online to what you can actually record in the accountant's world at the end of the day.
Sure.
And of course, things being lost to refunds and orders that never shipped out, and helping brands identify those things before the customer does and before anyone ever needs to call you, and providing some nice little automations on top of it to keep folks internal to the company informed of what's going on, and to keep the customer informed that's what's going on. And I think in a lot of ways that linkage between fulfillment and customer service has kind of been missing, and we're trying to close that gap.
I love it. And, when I first saw that you launched, I was like, okay, this makes total sense based on our previous conversations and problems and issues that we work through. So congratulations on the launch of the product.
Thank you.
And it's a very exciting time. I think it's a very cool product. And I just wanted to thank you, Chad, for joining us here. I've learned so much from this conversation and look forward to doing it again soon.
Yeah, man, I appreciate it. If I could just end with one final note, I mean, if there's a lesson that again I've learned in this time is how important it is to find good partners. And a good partner could mean a lot of different things at a lot of different stages of your company. But just knowing that you've got somebody sitting across the aisle from you who you can pick up the phone and call when the business changes or there's a problem. I mean, I feel like you guys were that to Made In and to me at various points in this journey. And just want to thank you for being a good partner. It's really more rare than I think anybody would like it to be, but you guys definitely proved to be that, and I appreciate that.
Thank you, Chad. I appreciate the words there, and have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, you too, Ben.
All right. See ya.
Thanks for listening to Well Delivered and the operators who keep fulfillment moving. Follow for more episodes like this, and we'll be back next time.